I
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, Mr. Jack Hirsch. Jack, we didn't talk about it before the fight, before the show. The biggest news is that we lost one of the greats over the weekend. I'm glad I have sunglasses on because I'll tell you what, this one bothers me. This hurts a little bit. We're going to talk all form in this hour. We're going to share our stories and memories with him. And Jack, there's just so many avenues to go, but I just said this came out of nowhere, and I didn't see this coming.
It came out of nowhere, but I don't know whether you recall, Frank, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the long-term effects the punches have on fighters. And if you recall, you'd mentioned Foreman at the time, like how clearly he spoke, how well he was. And I mentioned, but we haven't seen George do an interview for a while. He's been out of the public spotlight. I mean, in certain iconic athletes, when you don't hear from them for a while, to me, it's kind of a red flag, and I hope this is wrong in the case of, let's say, a Joe Namath. An absolute icon is Joe Willie Namath, but I haven't seen him do an interview recently at all.
But Jack, did you see today that it was in I think a London paper where they said Foreman about a year ago developed some type of kidney problem?
Yeah.
And it spread to his organs, and he lost weight, and he looked thin in the pictures we saw, and he had to walk with a walker. So I think the fact that his family was with him, I think this was something that came on. I don't think it's boxing related. We won't know, but
we don't know. We don't know in that.
We don't know. I mean, boxing didn't kill Joe Frazier.
No, but he wasn't speaking quite as clearly.
Right.
At stage of life. And Frank, we didn't have long careers. I mean, we boxed as amateurs, okay? And I think we speak closer to the way we did when we were young, I think, as opposed to, just mumbling the words. I mumbled when I was younger. So
ditto. I forget more than I did.
Yeah, but the point is, I don't want to blame boxing what happened to George Foreman, because if you think of a trade-off, he passed at 76. Let's say he never boxed. I sometimes think of this in relation to Muhammad Ali, his greatest opponent. Muhammad Ali lived till age 74, and Muhammad Ali lived the most incredible life like very few people have ever lived in the history of this world. But if Ali could trade that in to live to, let's say, 15 more years, 16 more years to age 90, okay? A good age, to live till. But he'd be just a middle-class person who no one ever would have heard of. Let's say he would have been a house painter like his dad.
He wouldn't have made the trade.
Would he trade it to get the 16 more years? You want to know something? At the end of your life, you would make the deal, because I think no one really thinks of the back end of things, and once in a while you do get like a fighter, for example, like an Andre Ward. He seemed to retire a little earlier. And maybe he wanted to kind of draw the line, not go on quite as long. But in the case of Foreman, age 76, you have no hard evidence it was boxing. You have no hard evidence it was that.
Jack, just think about this, though. This is what messes with me. I got a text Friday night from someone I know and discuss boxing with, and he said, "Did you hear George Foreman died?" And I text back, I said, no. And he texted me back, he said, no, you didn't hear, or no, he didn't die. And I said, no, I didn't hear. And I'm gonna Google it and see if it comes up. And I was thinking, Jack, I know that you watched him win the gold medal in '68 against Chapolis. I was 10 years old when I watched that fight. And what is it now? X amount of years since then, and now he's gone. It's like, which makes me feel older for the fact that I'm getting up there in age too, and like you just never know. But George Foreman was just always a pillar of strength. It wasn't like Muhammad Ali. I mean, we saw Muhammad Ali in a wheelchair weighing 180 pounds. Joe Frazier had liver cancer. We knew that the clock and the sand was almost through the hourglass with them. With George Foreman, even though we hadn't seen him, I kind of felt that he was going to be okay and be with us for a lot of years more.
Well, it came out of nowhere with Foreman, okay? With Frazier and Ali, it didn't. And it got me thinking about Foreman. Why was he as big as he was? Like, we use the term, Frank, legacy a lot of times. And Foreman was one of the few fighters in boxing history who truly had multiple legacies, a lot more than fighters who you could have said were greater than he were. Maybe they had one legacy. Like, you take, for example, a Jack Johnson. His one legacy for the most part was being the first black heavyweight champion and beating Jim Jeffries in that defining fight, in which he's been given a little too much credit for. In reality, considering Jeffries was coming off a 6-year layoff. But think of all of Foreman's legacies, directly and indirectly, what kind of made him famous. It was waving the American flag, following John Carlos and Tommy Smith, giving the black power salute. So that made Foreman really, really controversial. That's legacy number one. That always sticks with us. He historically, he's a big part of Olympic history in a way because what he did. Some people thought he was countering them. He said he never was. He was just proud to be an American.
And later he said if he could, he would have had 2 flags.
Right. I can't leave it to judge. Legacy number 2, indirectly. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. He was a part of the most dynamic fight call in history, you could say. Okay? I mean, it was just a plain knockdown, but people are using the term today. Even Joe Frazier started Jacqueline before she fought Layla Ali. She was taunting Layla Ali. She was going down goes Ali, down goes Ali, in an imitation of Cosell. And then you think of Zaire, the rope-a-dope. He played the supporting role. Like, he liked to joke, I played the part of the dope. But the point is, he was part of it, and that's culture now, the term rope-a-dope, that he was a part of. And then legacy number 4, becoming the oldest fighter, basically an inspiration for old fighters, what they can do, and old athletes. They always point to George Foreman.
I think that's wrong, but he is the example.
He is the example. And then legacy number 5, the George Foreman grilling machine. Even people who don't know a darn thing about boxing and normally never would have heard of George, they know about George because the grilling machine, took off. I mean, those are just 5 legacy things.
Jack, I do judo 2 or 3 times a week, and I was talking to my instructor today, he's 60 years old, I believe. And we were talking about it. He goes, yes. He goes, I said to, I think it was his daughter. He goes, you believe George Foreman died? And she said, yeah, he sure made one heck of a grill.
Yeah.
And he said, he's a 2-time heavyweight champion. She said, really? It's like, it's amazing that they don't know that. And I remember it was shortly after he fought Evander Holyfield. He was doing the talk show circuit. And I think he signed a contract to do a spokesman for Hager jeans or Hager khaki pants, but Hager sportswear. And the man that was the executive of the company, I forget who it was that interviewed him, and he said, why do you pick George Foreman? He goes, most boxers really don't have much of a career as far as endorsements go. They can endorse a few things, but they're limited. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, he goes, women love George Foreman. He says, in every female out there, George Foreman reminds them of either their father, their uncle, their grandfather, their brother, their cousin, a guy they dated, their husband, or whatever. He said he crosses all lines. He said he's the perfect guy. And who would have thought that would have been the case of George Foreman 30 years earlier?
Yeah, I mean, he tried to have an image when he was younger, because when he turned pro under Dick Sadler, Frank, as you know, he was stablemates with Sonny Liston. They sparred all the time. They traveled together, okay? And Foreman really admired Liston. And boy, oh boy, can you imagine that? Behind closed doors, Foreman and Liston. But Foreman was young and inexperienced.
And Liston was old.
The Olympics, yeah, but Liston was technically more polished, probably got the better of the early sparring sessions because of Foreman's inexperience. But
Jack, you know what?
Wanted to be like Sonny. Foreman wanted to be like Sonny.
You know what always tweaked me a little bit? Foreman had this reputation of being a nasty guy. But even if you go back to the interviews of the late 60s and the 70s, he was really not an abrasive guy, but it was just he was such a destroyer in the ring. I mean, he was what they tried to make Mike Tyson to be. But if you look, Foreman never downgraded his opponents, always spoke highly of them, and never was contrite or confrontational. And it's like he had that surly image because he had the fro, he had the muscles, he was mean looking, and when you watched him fight, you felt sorry for the other guy right before the bell rang. But he really was always a pretty good guy.
Yeah, I saw him fight 3 times live. And one of the fights was against the Brazilian Luis Pires, not quite a contender, a journeyman heavyweight.
August of 1971?
October.
Okay.
October 29th, 1971. And I'm going to tell, I called him up before the show. And he was on a talk show, a radio talk show. I called him up before a radio talk show. And I told him as a caller, I've seen Pierre's fight, and I like George by a TKO in 5. And his answer was, in typical George fashion, well, I just want to get a piece of corn any way I can. That's his response. And he actually did win at the end of the 4th round, Pierre's.
4th round, right.
But
never dropped Pierre's, but he beat the heck out of him.
And I'm going to tell you, that fight was revealing, and I had no clue until many years later how revealing it was. Even though Foreman overwhelmed Pierre's spent the fight lying on the ropes and never got knocked down. That was, and when you think of that, that's how Ali would practice in training. And if Pierre's could survive on the ropes, but you don't think of those things at the time. And
he got a lot better after that. I saw him fight live 5 times. I saw him fight at the Spectrum in 1970 against Roger Rouse, so he knocked out in about a minute and a half.
Roger Rouse or Roger Reisha, what's the name?
I get the names mixed up. Roger
Reisha, I think. Rouse was a light heavyweight contender.
It was Rouse, because Rouse was only like 186 for the fight.
Oh, okay.
And he fought everybody.
Rouse, okay.
So I saw him fight Rouse in 70. I went to the Cooney fight in Atlantic City. George Benton got me tickets, actually gave me his tickets for the Holyfield fight. And then I saw him fight Lou Savarese, and I saw his last fight with Shannon Briggs at the Spectrum. I was around him a few times. I set him up to do an interview, I think before he fought Terry Anderson, with Howard Eskin on WIP. And I'll tell you what, I really felt bad because Foreman came on and he was nice, and Eskin actually attacked him and said, "You're not fighting anybody, all these bums. Nobody takes you serious. You could never beat Mike."
You mean?
Yes. He said you could never last with Evander Holyfield or Mike Tyson. And George was really cool. He goes, well, I only fight him with her on the respirator. He kind of diffused Eskin a little bit, but I was a little annoyed at Eskin for really going after him like that because he didn't give him respect.
Lou is a friend of mine. He could be a little rough around the edges.
Jack, not Lou, Howard. Lou was the boxing writer. Howard Eskin was the Philly guy.
Right. Okay.
I don't know Lou. Was he truculent like Howard Eskin?
Lou is very opinionated. He would speak his mind. Okay. The editor of Boxing Illustrated.
Right.
But Lou told me something years
Wasn't he the referee for Allie Blue Lewis?
He was, exactly. Lou Eskin told me something that was really interesting. Eskin was an Ali fanatic, an absolute Ali fanatic. He wouldn't admit it, but he absolutely was. For example, he thought Ali won the first Frazier fight 9 rounds to 6.
He's a clown.
He was that type of fanatic, Lou Eskin. But I remember he once said something. He let his guard down. He said the foreman of the Frazier fight, the first fight, of course, he said no one could have beaten him that night.
I don't think that's a reach, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was just Eskin was just having a moment feeling that way, but he felt Foreman was practically a perfect, fighting machine that particular night. But
Jack, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. I think it is a little bit of a reach because I think Ali at his best, moving, dancing, all his speed, style-wise, he was as bad for Foreman as Foreman would be bad for Joe Frazier. Nearly, I think.
All right, well, let's touch on that a little later in the show. The thing that I always thought that stood out about George Foreman, the fighter, there are 3 things. And Jack, I said this years ago, probably like in '94 after he beat Michael Moore. Number 1, he went into the Olympics with 1 year and 4 months experience, and I think he was like 18-3 as an amateur going into the Olympics. So think about this. Here's a guy that would be like you and I discovering a guy today, and in 1.5 years he wins the Olympics. Not going to happen. So with 1.5 years experience, he goes from a street tough guy to an Olympic champion. Now, look, the Cubans didn't come into the Olympics until '72, but everybody else worldwide was there. The Germans, the whole world, the best in the world. He wins that, and he scores 3 knockouts in 4 fights. Then you could make a case when he fought Smokin' Joe for the title. Smokin' Joe was 29-0, 25 knockouts, was a 3.5-1 favorite, and he annihilated him. But my point is, other than when Ali beat him, you could make a case Foreman beat the most formidable champion to win the title of anybody in history, because usually it's the old guy losing to the young guy. Frazier was only 29. Yes, the Ali fight took something out of him, but he was a monumental favorite in that fight. So he beats this monster, this giant slayer, and Joe Frazier. And then he takes off 10 years and he comes back and he beats another undefeated guy to win the heavyweight championship. So those 3 things alone, when you want to talk about legacy, nobody else measures up to that.
I was thinking before, I just want to make a quick remark on Joe Frazier. The Joe Frazier who fought Muhammad Ali in the fight of the century, do you really think Terry Daniels would have lasted 4 rounds with him, or even gotten out of the first round? Do you really think so?
Maybe he gets to the second because he runs.
It's possible, okay? Maybe the second round. Ron Stander, does he get through 4 full rounds and is quitting on his stool? I mean,
But Frazier was in better shape for Foreman than he was those 2 guys.
Foreman would have beaten the best of Joe Frazier. That's not an argument at all. But I just think what happened in Kingston against the Joe Frazier, the first Ali fight, it would have been more difficult for Foreman, a lot more. I think, the fight would have gone 7, 8, maybe 9 rounds, and Foreman would have prevailed. He would have beaten Frazier. I don't think it would have been the
I
one.
disagree with that, but
It's a matter of opinion. We're never going to know the answer. Foreman and Ali have something in common. I never thought of this before. Okay, actually, Max Kellerman indirectly inspired it when I thought about it, what he said about Tom Brady. Kellerman said Brady fell off the cliff, and then he had a Hall of Fame career after he fell off the cliff. George Foreman, the two comings, let's split them up. The first coming of George Foreman, he's a Hall of Famer. The second coming of George Foreman, forget the first coming. I think that gets him in the Hall of Fame. He won the lineal heavyweight title and beat some good
at
guys
45.
in addition. So I think Ali, of course, had 2 Hall of Fame careers before the forced layoff. That was a Hall of Fame career, and then he had one after. How many great fighters have had the 2-part Hall of Fame careers? Joe Louis, if he retired after the first Schmeling fight or whatever, does he get into the Hall of Fame? Perhaps. The second coming of Joe Louis after the Schmeling fight, gets in the Hall of Fame. That's a Hall of Famer. But up to the first Schmeling fight when he got knocked out, I'm not certain. I think so, but I'm not certain. But Foreman had 2 Hall of Fame careers.
You're right. He did. That's a great point. Jack, as you're speaking, you just made me think of something. I think it was right before the show. I asked you, do you remember where you were when Ali died? And you didn't hesitate. You said yes. Obviously, you do with Foreman. But I asked you if you remembered where you were when Smokin' Joe died, and you said no. And Jack, as much as I love Smokin' Joe, I can't remember where I was when he first died. So there's one example where Frazier is overshadowed by Ali and Foreman. And then what you just said, Ali and Foreman both had 2 Hall of Fame careers. Joe didn't. Joe is always the odd man out. And he was part of the best trifecta, heavyweight trifecta in history. And people forget that he fought both Ali and Foreman when all 3 of them were undefeated, and he was favored over both of them.
Yeah, had Ali never come into Frazier's life, take away the Ali fights, especially the first one. I said Frazier's still a Hall of Famer.
He is, but does he go down as an all-time great? Maybe not.
How do we look at him exactly? We look at him as a heck of a good fighter, but he needed to be on Ali's coattails. I mean, Ali without Frazier, he had Liston, he had Foreman, he had the gift of gab. Elevated Ali a great deal. We're not disputing that at all. But but when Frazier made Ali bigger. Ali, you could argue, made Frazier iconic, too. And he wouldn't have quite been iconic. Now with Foreman, you think of the legacy, with the rope-a-dope historically. You're not going to find anyone, Frank, who is going to quite say that Foreman is the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. I mean,
if he beats Ali, he is.
If he beats Ali, but what happens? Let's say he beats Ali. Okay, that fight was in 75. Okay,
74. Ali was 32.
Oh, in 74, right. 74. And he loses to Jimmy Young in 77.
He beats Ali. He doesn't lose to Young.
But it would be 3 years later.
Okay, but Jack,
Young still had a style that could have given him problems.
Jack,
yeah.
Go ahead, finish.
No, but who says he would have been the same Foreman? You're basing that he would be the same Foreman.
Jack, after Foreman lost to Ali, he got rid of Dick Sadler and he went to Gil Clancy, who was beloved. But Gil Clancy, in my opinion, and I said this then, He made Foreman, he transformed him into a boxer puncher, a wait and react guy. He could have never defeated Ali fighting that style. And that's what cost him in the Young fight, because he didn't go after him until the 7th round. And then he got out of gas, and he'd only been in Puerto Rico for like 24 hours. Had Foreman defeated Ali, and he had that seek and destroy mindset, the Larry Holmes era never happens. And the only way he loses is maybe 4 or 5 years down the road. He gets bored and he just overlooks everybody. And I say this too. Think about this. Frazier prepared for Ali as if winning meant living and losing meant instant death. Ali prepared for Foreman as if winning meant living, losing meant instant death. But Ali went through the motions with Frazier. It's like, yes, did he train hard? Yes, but he didn't have that fear and urgency because he was overconfident. And Foreman, even though he has said crazy things since Zaire, Jack, the one thing that Foreman said that I totally believe is he was never more sure of an outcome of a boxing match than when before he fought Muhammad Ali, because he rationalized, I killed Norton, I killed Frazier, they both beat him. Just like Ali said, Quarry didn't lay a glove on me. He beat Frazier up for a good 3 rounds. Bonavina knocked him down twice. I knocked him out. I think Foreman, what hurt him the most in the Rumble in the Jungle was he was too overconfident. Not saying he would have won, but I think he was too overconfident.
Perhaps you're correct there. I don't know what he's thinking, but I see what you're saying, and it's certainly logical. But Foreman fought against Ali like, I'm going to throw everything I have at this guy.
And he stood up. Nobody thought that could be.
No one can withstand this attack. I'll throw the kitchen sink at him for 6-7 rounds. There's no way he could withstand it. And also, you have to think that part of Foreman's training, that he did have a little bit of a strategy, at least. Besides,
Jack, they showed him trying to cut the ring off. That's all he worked on.
But when Ali was there on the ropes, he didn't have to cut the ring off, and he kept flailing away, punching. Anything that was there that he could try to hit. And logic was that Ali wasn't going to be able to withstand, an attack.
And that was the difference. Ali didn't outbox him, Jack. He actually out-toughed him. Ken Norton said repeatedly in his book, in interviews, and he said when I interviewed him in 2001 on ESPN Radio 1490, he said, a lot of people compare Ali and Holmes. He goes, and they're close. He says the difference is, he goes, hitting Muhammad Ali is like hitting a brick wall. He says it hurts your hands hitting him. He's so hard and so solid. And that is kind of what got him through the Foreman fight. I mean, Ali didn't dance because he said Foreman took 2 steps and cut him off. He would have been out of gas. So he said he took some of his shots, like, I think I can handle that. Went back against the ropes. They were loose. He rode with the shots. He has radar, and that's what got him through the fight. Plus, Jack, Ali never trained harder for a fight while he was still a great fighter, mentally more so than he did George Foreman. His whole career rested on that fight, and he has said to his dying day, that's the fight that meant the most to him.
That's the fight that meant the most. Yeah, absolutely. But had he won the first Frazier fight,
would be different.
The fight that, meant the most coming back. We've discussed numerous times, and we've come to the conclusion, and most people have, that the best of Frazier could never beat Foreman, and even Frazier said so himself. We never discussed Ken Norton, a great fighter in his own right. Is it the same as with Frazier? Did Norton just have a bad night, which Norton tended to have from time to time? Could Norton on a given night seriously have troubled the peak George?
I don't think he has tool one. No, I don't think so, Jack, because he can't move around the ring and stick him and jab him like an Ali could. And Eventually, he's going to have to trade, and he doesn't have the chin or the guns. And the few times he hit Foreman during their fight, Foreman never even changed his expression. And I wouldn't have a hard time if somebody told me or said that Foreman, between Frazier and Norton, may have been the best heavyweight of all time. And your friend had said, Eskin had said, nobody would have beat Foreman the night of January 22nd, 1973 in Kingston, Jamaica. I don't have a problem with that, Jack, because I don't care who you are. Jack Dempsey, Max Baer, you name them. No one is ripping Joe Frazier apart and making him look like a stumblebum the way George Foreman did. I remember the day of that fight. I was in wrestling practice. I was a freshman. And I said to the guy I used to wrestle all the time, this guy, Mike Smith. I said, you know, Mike, it was during one of our breaks. I said, I would love to be Joe Frazier tonight. And he said, why? I said, he's the heavyweight champ of the world. He beat Ali. I said, he's fighting the supposed next great George Foreman, who will not be able to get out of his way. Frazier's going to knock the hell out of Foreman, and then he's going to fight Ali again. And even if he loses, it'll be a decision, and he'll still be 1-1. I said, Joe Frazier's on top of the world right now. My dad, let me tell you this real quick. This is how my dad worked in one of my favorite nights. My dad owned a bunch of gas stations, and I worked in them. At the dinner table, he says to me, this is at like 5 o'clock. I go in at 6. He said, look, he goes, I tried to get somebody to fill in for you so we could go see the fight tonight. He said, but I can't get anybody. He said, so look, he says it'll be on the Whitewater Sports Saturday. You'll have to watch it then. So I act like I'm okay. But my dad knew me, and he knew I was mad, disappointed, had a bad attitude. He knew I'd probably be mean to the customers that night.
Which fight, Frank?
Foreman Frazier, the first one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So the Cherry Hill Arena opened at 9 o'clock that night. That's when you could start going in to see the preliminaries. The station closed at 10. At 8:30, Jack, my father rolls into the gas station in his 73 Cadillac Coupe de Ville. He says, look, he goes, shut it down. Let's go see the fight. So he takes me, my brother, and another guy to see the fight. My mother told me the next morning, she goes, you know, your dad planned on taking you to the fight all along, but he wanted to make you sweat it out for a while. He goes, that's why he didn't tell you. So he takes us to the fight. My dad was a huge Joe Frazier guy. We're watching the fight. I remember after the first round, this guy said to me, next to me, he goes, I can't believe that Foreman's had him down 3 times. I says, you wait to this second round. The worst thing Foreman could have done was made Frazier mad. We know how the second round ended. You know, my father said the second the fight was declared over, he leans over in my ear and he goes, what will he do to your boy Clay?
You know,
he always called him Clay.
That the referee, Arthur McCanty, had the same thought after the first knockdown. He said, you know, he'd refereed Frazier fights before and Foreman fights as well. And he said now he thought, Frazier's really going to come out smoking now. I
didn't know that, Jack. I didn't know that.
Yeah, after the first knockdown. I can't believe after 3 knockdowns you were still holding out faith in Frazier to come back, though. At that point, I'd actually had a split call. It's not logical, but I thought Frazier was going to outlast Foreman and win the rematch at the Nassau Coliseum, which he didn't do. He got stopped in 5 rounds. But I actually picked Foreman to knock Frazier out in 4 rounds in the first fight. I thought Frazier was
really,
but then after Foreman lost to Ali, I thought he was kind of like damaged goods. He's never going to be the same. He's just going to fall apart, and then Frazier will get his revenge in the rematch. But split call.
I think this is well known. Yank Durham did all he could, except coming out and saying, Joe, I don't think you can beat him, to try to dissuade him from that fight. And Eddie Futch is the one that thought that we'll be okay. But Yank Durham tried to.
Did Fudge think Frazier would really beat Foreman, or what?
Fudge thought that the Frazier would be okay with Foreman. Yank Durham was dead set against it. But Frazier said to Yank, "I'm going to fight him. You're either going to be with me or you're not." He goes, "Well, I'm taking the fight."
I believe that, Frank. I don't know. Where did you hear that story? Because knowing the relationship, Frazier would never leave Yank Durham. They were just too close. He never would have left them.
Yank Durham said to Frazier, he goes, "Look, we don't know this guy. He's big. He's awkward. Fight Cassius Clay again. We already beat him. We know how to fight him. If you lost a decision to him, we're 1-1 and we have a third fight." He goes, "If you fight this guy, we don't know what we're up against. And, it might not be as easy as you think." He tiptoed around saying that he's wrong for you, but he never came out and said it. But Frazier, Jack, if you remember at that time, Ali demanded purse parity. He was going on TV all the time saying, "Look, my fights are beamed on closed circuit all around the world. Your fights are on national TV." He goes, "The people are coming me. You may have the title, but I'm the people's champ. They're coming to see me." So Frazier had to make a decision. Fight Ali for $3 million or fight Foreman for $850,000. He fought Foreman.
Frank, no one ever discusses this, but how does heavyweight history during Foreman's time play out? Okay, he wins the title from Frazier. His first title defense is against Joe King Roman, okay, in Japan. He stops him in one round, but he hits him late while he's down. What happens if we had an overzealous referee, and it has happened, disqualifies Foreman? Roman is the champion. He wants no part of Foreman. He defends against Ali or Frazier or whatever, and loses his next fight. He's going to lose to whoever he fights.
Jack, that's a great movie, but never happening.
What happens to George, if Roman, if he got it on a disqualification? Look, it happened to Roy Jones against Montel Griffin, but that had no historic.
Roy wasn't, but Roy didn't have those multi-million-dollar fights lined up like they had with Foreman to fight Frazier again or Ali. If Foreman could have picked Roman up and thrown him out of the ring, they wouldn't have disqualified him.
Ali was taking his time fighting for the title then, but if Roman would have won it, they couldn't get to Roman's house fast enough, Ali and Frazier, and bang on the door. They would have practically said, "We're going to take this fight for practically no money at all just to get the title."
Jack, and if you remember at the time when Ali was going through all those bouts before he fought Norton, before the Frazier rematch, he tried to get a fight with Foreman. In fact, the famous picture of Foreman in the ring at the second Ali Quarry fight, when Ali wouldn't shake his hand or talk to him, and then they interviewed him after the fight, and he said, "Why?" He goes, "I think I'm fighting him next." He goes, "I don't want to talk to him. He's the enemy." But Dick Sadler told Ali, he said, "Look," he goes, "Muhammad, we love you." He goes, "But we want the man that has the title, and that's Joe. And George matches up better with him than he does you. So we're going to fight the man with the title." But Ali, if you look, he fought everybody except Foreman in that reign.
Can I tell you one of the coolest things I ever saw in boxing that was done by Foreman? I'm watching with my friend. This was great. It's the Ali Norton rematch. Foreman had won the title from Frazier early in the year. He's watching the Ali Norton rematch, and all of a sudden, I forgot what round, maybe the
fourth round,
something like that. Howard Cosell saying, "George Foreman is leaving the arena." So you see Foreman go over to Sinatra, shake his hand, and Howard Cosell's yelling, George,
come back. Where are you going?"
And he waves like this, and he leaves. And it was one of the great psychological ploys. Like, it just leaves the arena during the fight. Like, I can't take this.
Just goes to show you that he thought.
It had a psychological effect, because my friend watching it with me saying, "He's going to kill Ali. He's so sure about it." And that's the message he wanted to send.
Jack, everybody thought that was the case, that he was going to kill Ali. But let me ask you this. Okay, we discussed his first career Who would have thought? I remember going to see. You were at the Quarry Frazier fight. I saw it on closed circuit. Foreman
At the second fight, I wasn't at the first Frazier.
Okay. On the first fight, Foreman made his debut on Quarry Frazier card. Who would have thought that guy would eventually be the guy to beat Smokin' Joe? And then Foreman fought Peralta the first time on the Frazier Ellis undercard. And if somebody would have said to you after he won 10 rounds with Peralta, hey, this is the guy that's going to beat Smokin' Joe after Smokin' Joe destroyed Ellis, nobody thought that would be the case.
He didn't look good. Peralta, seasoned vet, gave him a hard time. You may be forgetting, Frank. I mean, and you have a good memory. You remember, so much. But I'm not sure whether you remember they fought a second time, Foreman. And
Foreman stopped him late in 71.
In the 10th round.
Right.
He wasn't beating him up to the point that he stopped him. He was winning the fight. He was in control, but he never really hurt Peralta till the end, and that's till the 10th round. So that, and again, that's a great point, Frank. We talk about red flags. If Peralta's seasoned vet could give Foreman all those rounds, what would an Ali do? We didn't even consider that.
But that was only Foreman's 16th fight when he fought Peralta the first time.
The second time, the rematch. I mean,
the second time was probably like his 24th fight.
When he lasted to the 10th round. You know what's interesting too? You mentioned Foreman's debut, and it shows you how fickle the public is. 9-10 months before, Foreman was an American hero, waving the flag, how proud they were. They booed him out of the ring at Madison Square Garden. What did he do?
When he fought Don Waldheim.
Because he overpowered his opponent and stopped him in 3 rounds. What more was he supposed to do? What did they expect from him? Because he took care of business. He blew his opponent out. I could understand if the fight ended in 32 seconds. They would have booed, get someone at least who could fight back a little. But Waldheim had hung in there till, the 3rd round. And I don't understand people. The first pro show I ever went to, Frank, Foreman main evented against Chuck Wepner. And
that was his 4th fight.
And who would have thought at that time, if you froze the moment, that the movie Rocky that would later come out, that Wepner would be the inspiration that changed, lives and etc. The Rocky movie.
Jack, think about this.
Yeah.
You're watching the Foreman fight against Wepner, and who would have thought he's the guy that Ali is going to beat to win the title the second time, and his first defense is going to be against Wepner?
Yeah. I mean, Foreman wouldn't have surprised me if you told me that he was going to fight Ali at some point, but that Ali was out of the ring at that point. We weren't sure whether he was ever going to get back in. I remember when I saw Ron Lyle in his 4th pro fight at Sunnyside Gardens on the club show. I think this was like 1972, okay? I used to go home and write about the fights just for myself. Just a hobby that, I didn't share it with anyone, but my own notes. I remember writing, Frank, that Lyle and Foreman are on a collision course. That's going to be the big fight someday. It was one of the great heavyweight fights, but it wasn't for title like I would have imagined. No, it
was Foreman's first fight back.
But it was, one of the great classics. I mean, Foreman Lyle.
That was a great fight. And Jack, I remember following Foreman's career, and I thought this is on the way up. I thought he was really good. I didn't think he could beat Ali or Frazier, but if you go back and you look, after Frazier beat Ali, in between that time, between March of 71 and January 73, if you look at the guys Foreman fought, he really didn't fight anybody of note, and that's because Sadler knew that they were in line to get a shot at Frazier, and they wanted to play it safe and make sure there were no mess-ups along the way. Because, as I said, Sadler wanted Foreman to fight Frazier for the title and not Ali. It's funny. We didn't rehearse anything, and with George Foreman, There's just so much. So let me ask you this.
Let me just say one thing with Dick Sadler while we still have his name out there. He came up with one of the funnier lines that I heard. After Foreman stopped Luis Pierres, they asked Luis Pierres what he thought. And Pierres said about Foreman, that boy needs a lot of work. And Sadler said, what makes him qualified to say George needs more work? He got a damn beating. That kind of cracked me up, you know.
You're right about that, Jack. And I lost my point just now.
This is a point I've heard you make, Frank. I think I saw you make this point on social media, and I want to discuss it. There were two George Foremans. Some people feel the second coming would have beaten the first coming.
I have no doubt in my mind that he loses.
Yeah. Now, Angelo Dundee tried to smooth that out by saying, well, Foreman is a better technical fighter the second time around, which he was, technically.
He was.
Speaking.
He had to be.
Could he have adopted that technical style with his youth and his ferocity when he was first coming?
Perhaps. I think that Dick Sadler, they just fell in love with his power. And I think they took a lot of shortcuts because I heard Dick Sadler say in videos, George, there isn't a man in the world that can stand up to your punch. And I just think that's how they trained him.
Sadler had another line. People would say, well, George can't really fight. And they'd say to ask Sadler, and Sadler would say, I hope George never learns how to fight. All I care about is to hear the ring announcer say the winner by a knockout and still world heavyweight champion George Foreman.
You know, Jack, and it's funny because this man is still alive, but one of the more impressive fights in Foreman's career was the night he just beat George Chuvalo from pillar to post.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that fight?
I mean, Joe couldn't even do that.
I was at the Garden, but I remember I heard Chuvalo talking about that, you know, the ringside lecture in Canastota, and he was swearing it was stopped too soon, saying Foreman.
No way.
No, listen to me, Frank. That Foreman wasn't actually landing the punches at the end. It looked like he was landing it. I'm going to ask you this, Frank. You like to look at old footage. If you have a chance, turn to the ending. Don't watch the whole fight. The last round, the ending of Chuvalo and Foreman. And watch carefully. And Chuvalo might have a point. I mean, even though I thought the stoppage was great that night, it was absolutely McCanty should have stopped it. When you watch the replay and you listen to Chuvalo, he requests we look at the replay. And I looked at it and I'm figuring, you know, maybe it shouldn't have been stopped at that point.
It's just seared in my head, Jack, so much that George was killing him, though, up until that point.
Watch the last punches and see. Maybe I'm wrong in that. If I watch it again, I might retract what I'm saying now. I'm just not sure about a stoppage. No, let me put it another way. I could see Chuvalo's point. You know,
so then he gets stopped in the fourth round?
No, I mean, listen. I mean, I remember Nat Lupe, he was the editor of Ring Magazine at the time, or he was the Fleischer's assistant. Yeah, Fleischer was still alive at the time for a couple of more years, 1970. And I used to call as a kid. I used to ask the guys at the Ring Magazine office to talk boxing. And I asked Nat Lupe, well, who are you picking between Chuvalo and Foreman? And he said, Chuvalo should take him apart, but I can't see an investment like Foreman going down the drain. It made no sense to him how a George Foreman could be put in a fight where he would lose, in
right.
a situation like that. But who was more impressive, Foreman against Chuvalo or Frazier against Chuvalo? Frazier damaged Chuvalo more, took him one more round. And, I mean, if you're George Chuvalo, you could go dancing after the fight with Foreman. Not that you should. I wouldn't advise it. But after Frazier
messed his eye up.
He was
that was brutal.
Oh, that was brutal. I would have rather been if I'm Chuvalo. The Foreman fight wasn't as physically hurting as against Frazier.
Jack, you know what I wish I could find? I think it was the Sunday night. I think Foreman and Ali fought on a Tuesday night in the U.S. And on Sunday night, I forget what station it was. It was one of the three major networks. They did an hour and a half special on the Ali Foreman fight with Jim Brown. And I remember Jim Brown talking, and he said, they asked me to spar Ali and George. He said, I didn't do either. He goes, I would have been okay with sparring Muhammad because he's my buddy. And he said, he's not going to try to hurt me or make me look bad. He said, there is no way I was going to get in the ring and spar George Foreman.
You know, I'm not sure how George was on sparring partners. Different fighters get different reputations. I know Jerry Cooney went very hard on sparring partners, you know, and, you know, different guys, it's in their nature, like in the gym. You know, Ali made a good point that I don't know whether anyone considered when his fight with Foreman, the original date was canceled when Foreman got cut in sparring. He caught an elbow or whatever.
From Bill McBurry.
Ali was saying, you know, now Foreman's going to see he's not that invincible. A guy could cut him and the fight could be put off. You wonder, was there anything to those words? Foreman at the time, reports say he wanted to just go home. He wanted out of Zaire. He just didn't want to know from it.
They also say Ali did, but Ali hit it.
Well, Ali was probably tired of the whole training and being there, and he was having a problem with his wife at the time, you know, as well. And Ali was under enormous pressure, you know. I mean, fight-wise as a fighter, because you're going in against George Foreman, you know, who destroys guys. And Ali had to have some fear of Foreman, you know, like he had to fear Sonny Liston. It wasn't just the fear of getting beat. No one was more courageous than Ali, but you're going in against a monster who's trying to take your head off, you know, and a lot of pressure. But
Jack, let me ask you, let's cover two things real quick. One, what happens if Ali and Foreman have a rematch? Give me a capsule on that.
When would they have the rematch?
Say Foreman doesn't fight Jimmy Young and he gets to fight Ali instead. So it's the Ali that fought Shavers, the Ali that fought Evangelista and Shavers against Foreman that beat Pedro Augusto and Dino Dennis.
Ali was so hard to knock out. So hard to knock out. And I think it goes the distance.
Okay, I agree. I think Foreman's wait and react style, I think Ali can live with that and probably wins the decision if he fights him like he did Young.
All right, and here, shape. He wouldn't be in the shape he was against.
Right, but he didn't have as much left either.
The Ali who fought Kenny Norton in the third fight would beat George, okay?
Okay, two more. Ali that fought Zora Foley against Foreman that fought Frazier.
I think Ali would be more mentally up for the fight than he was. He knew he was going to beat Foley easy. Ali had the style. We always say why Foreman would have beaten Frazier. The only debate we ever have would have been whether Frazier would have gone into the middle rounds, you know, at his best, been stopped early. But we agree Foreman would have won. It was the style thing. Foreman didn't have the style to beat Ali. And then Frank, if Tyson fought Ali 10 times and they were at their best, I believe Tyson would knock him out one time in the 10 fights. He would catch him one time in 10 fights. Ali would win at least 8 of them, quite possibly 9 out of the 10. You know, it's like Herb Brooks saying, we could play him 10 times and they might win 9, you know, the USA hockey.
But tonight's at 10.
Right. I mean, I just don't see, you know, Foreman.
Okay.
Over Ali.
I'm thinking of these things as we're doing this. Okay, I think that Foreman of 73 is too strong for the 67 version of Ali. I would favor Foreman in that fight. Okay. Who is the reason why they didn't fight during his comeback? Foreman Tyson was a big fight. Who do you think was more at fault as why they didn't fight? I say Tyson.
I don't know why it never quite got together. You have to consider the timeline. Foreman came back to the ring, what, in 1988? Okay? And, Tyson was basically at his peak when Foreman came back. But Foreman hadn't earned the right to fight him, and we didn't know what Foreman was bringing to the table. We thought this might be one big sideshow.
Jack, wait a second, though. Foreman beat Cooney in January of 90, and Tyson lost to Douglas in February of 90. That was a huge fight back then. It was a fight for Foreman to prove he was for real and for Tyson to get back on track.
Okay, you said it best. Tyson lost to Douglas. He wasn't the champion anymore. So Foreman wasn't his main goal.
It was still the biggest money fight in boxing at that time.
Tyson wanted the rematch with Douglas, after that. That didn't transpire.
But he took tune-ups.
Yeah, but it would have happened. It just didn't all quite fall into place.
Jack, they fought on a double main event together in June. And that was supposed to set up them fighting.
Is that June 1990? Tyson, keep in mind, he went to prison in 92? Did he have a problem?
But that fight would have happened before that. He didn't get in trouble until like February of 91, where him and Foreman were supposed to fight in late 90.
Do you really think Tyson made the decision not to fight Foreman? Tyson himself. I think, Tyson would have.
I know that as a fact, Jack, for two reasons. Bobby Goodman told that to me and George Benton at the Holyfield Sheamus McDonough fight, and Tyson used to sit there with Customato as a 13-year-old and marvel at his fight with Joe Frazier. And Customato told Tyson it's suicide to try to take the fight to George Foreman, having no conception that they could ever possibly be scheduled to meet. So I'm going to answer the question. I think Tyson wanted no parts of Foreman. What do you think?
I can't believe that. I think Tyson was a fighter he'd be willing to go in with anyone.
Okay.
I really do. I don't think Tyson.
All right. We disagree on that.
Sometimes the timelines, they don't quite meet. I'll give you an example. The Bo Lewis fight never took place, okay? And that was more, I believe, Rock Newman making the decision.
I agree with you there.
But I feel Bo would have been willing to fight Lewis.
Jack, we're running out of time, and I want to get to one more thing. I disagree with you completely because I think the timeline was there. I think Tyson just don't want the part of it. Lastly,
okay,
where do you rank George Foreman in the all-time heavyweight pantheon? I'll go first. I rank Muhammad Ali 1, Joe Louis 2, George Foreman 3. And I do think that there's a case that Foreman could have defeated Lewis, but he didn't beat Ali, but he has enough of a resume. I rank him 3rd.
I don't have an exact rating outside of Ali Lewis. They're clearly 1 and 2. And
okay.
We're talking about the others. Are we talking about accomplishment? There's so many variables. Look at what Foreman did at his age compared to what the other heavyweights did.
I'm asking the metric that you use. I used head-to-head and accomplishment, and I meshed them together.
I would put him a little behind Lennox Lewis based on accomplishment, level of opposition, having success against, the
off the top of your head. Okay, then let's do it this way. Off the top of your head, give me the guys that you rank above George Foreman historically. Ali, Joe Louis, Lennox Lewis. Who else?
It's hard, Frank. I could say Jim Jeffries for his era. Okay?
I'm asking for your opinion, Jack. You could say Joe Hip.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to give you an approximate number where Foreman would rate, It would go anywhere from 4 to 10. I know I'd have to sit down and have an exact listing. I mean, Jack Dempsey, for example, ducked Harry Wells. So I'm not crazy about that element involved. I think too much is made out of Marciano technically never having a loss. But he had some good wins there. Like the first
Jack, will we ever see his likes again?
No, not as a personality and everything in his story, with the youth center and everything. One of the all-time greats. I mean, you could rate him as high as number 3, like you did in the all-time heavyweight ratings, without anyone being able to, give you without anyone being able to use the word ridiculous.
Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. Rest in peace, George. You were one of the greats, and it was our privilege to talk about you tonight. Thanks for watching.